We are 1 week away from you winning your fantasy championship, but we have to win in week 16 first before we get there. So we're going to go through. We're going to talk about every matchup and rank 40 different running backs in tiers this week. We're going to rank them as a must start, a fine start, a flex, a weak flex, or just flat out sit them this week. I will say up front, credit to the good people over at BDGE, Nick Ericolano. He's been running this series for a few weeks now on an abbreviated week for our content. We thought it'd be fun to run on our channel as well. So you all get some more thoughts as well. So I want to give that up front. Credit to the people over at BDGE. But Cameron, let's not waste any time because we've got a full slate of matchups to get through. So let's start with Thursday Night Football between the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers. The running backs we have in this game, Javonte Williams, Gus Edwards. Well, okay, let's start with the Broncos. We have a plethora. We have Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime. I have no interest in Jaleel McLaughlin or Audric Estime in any capacity. I don't want them sniffing my lineup this week, yet at the same time, I feel like we have Javonte listed as a weak flex. I'm kind of okay if people just want to sit him this week too. What are your thoughts around Javonte?
Yeah, I feel like you'd have to be pretty desperate to start Javonte. We talked about it, me and you going back and forth on a couple players before we got on this, and we're like, this guy should be at would be at the top of this tier. Javonte Williams is the bottom of the weak flex tier. Right?
Yeah,
like when we lay out the rest of these guys, he is the bottom of that tier. So yeah, I agree. If you're like, I'm not dealing with it, I don't blame you. 6 attempts last week. Yeah, it's not pretty.
What is he giving you 5 straight weeks of less than 30 rushing yards as well?
Yeah.
You're basically praying for a touchdown, which is like, I think that's his only qualifier for being a weak flex is that he is the most likely out of himself, Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime to probably find the end zone in a not so great matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers here. So yeah, I wouldn't even think about Jaleel McLaughlin or Audric Estime, but Javonte Williams, I think you can maybe flex this week, but that's like if it's truly break the glass. He's probably closer to a sit for me than anything else. And you're not even touching Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal this week.
No.
I will point out with Kamani Vidal though, 67% of snaps to Gus Edwards 27 this last week. Like how much are you buying into the changing of the tides there, or is that more of the Chargers were getting walloped by the Bucs last week? Kamani Vidal is just the more athletic back, so let's get him in for pass catching reps.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. You look at it, attempts. Kamani Vidal still only had 3 attempts to Gus Edwards 8. And so I think that's really what it came down to is the fact that the Bucs got up on the Chargers in this one and they just had to play from behind.
Yeah. We'll call it good there. We don't really want to sit here and elaborate too much on matchups we really don't want to talk about, right? We'll try and cruise through the must starts because those are guys you should just automatically be starting. We want to spend a little bit more time on the fine starts and the flexes as to why they fall into their tiers respectively. Let's move on to the next game. We do have 2 Saturday games this week, starting with the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. This one should be I don't know, will it be a banger? I don't even know without Patrick Mahomes and with how this Texans offense has been playing recently. I mean, it might not be the banger that we thought it would be at the start of the season. Let's be honest. Joe Mixon, he is a must start. I do not care that he had a down week this last week. Joe Mixon is a must start every single week when he is a top 3 running back in fantasy points per game. The real conversation we should have here is Isiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, because last week, not very productive against the Cleveland Browns, but they both earned the same amount of carries and the same amount of targets. So they both kind of came out like at the same level last week. Does one of them, do you have a liking to one of these two over the other, or are they both just kind of stuck in the weak flex without room to move up?
I think I'm going to continue to lean towards Pacheco. I think I was a little premature last week when I bet Ty the Caniac combo that Pacheco would hit 14 fantasy points. But I think as he continues to get more healthy, Kansas City is going to continue to use him more, continue to ramp him up, get him ready for the playoffs. So I'm going to continue to lead Pacheco, just assuming that he's going to take over the backfield more and more each week.
Well, and part of me wonders how much are they trying to keep Pacheco fresh in a game that they pretty much had a stranglehold on. I mean, the box score won't tell you how much of a walloping that game actually was. The Browns stood no chance in that game. So part of me does wonder, hey, was Kareem Hunt getting more run here because, the Chiefs knew they had it in the bag and they weren't necessarily playing with their food necessarily, but part of me does wonder if that's why Kareem Hunt got more run. Either way, The Texans very stingy against running backs. Literally, the fourth fewest fantasy points allowed at the position this year. So not a matchup I'm looking to target. And despite the Chiefs being the worst matchup, again, with Joe Mixon at 12 for 22 last week, I'm shaking that one off. All he has to do is break one loose and find the end zone. Bobby Sloak is going to continue leaning on him, running this offense through him as well. So weak flex for both Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. Must start for Joe Mixon. Before we go any further, though, want to make sure we remind the good people over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications for all of our most recent content if you haven't already. Numerous people I've seen. I didn't even know I wasn't subscribed. I watch your videos constantly, and then they go and subscribe. So that might be you, but if you're new to the channel, we're still cranking out content for you the rest of the season. I mean, who else is going through? I mean, other channels are going through like 40 plus players, but how many of them are putting them into tiered rankings for you all and saying this dedicated at this point in the season? So we want to make sure you win your championship this year. If you want to make sure you lock down that title, make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications as well, so you know when all of our newest content goes up. Another Saturday game we have here, Cameron. The Pittsburgh Steelers visit the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry, again, I know it's been a downward slide. I know he had an underwhelming performance against the New York Giants in a game that, frankly, he probably should have dominated. But with what we've seen this year, there was literally zero question on whether you should be starting him or not. You are automatically starting him in your lineups this week. And maybe I should have said that on the front end too. This isn't necessarily a flushed out like rankings list. This is more so how much confidence are you starting these players with? I think it's more reflective of that and not like a rankings tiered list. You know, we're not putting these players into an order tier. So Derrick Henry, you know, you are starting him automatically. There's no question you're taking him out of your lineup. Then we have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren.
Yeah.
I don't love either of these guys in this matchup. Is it fair to say that the only reason Najee makes it into the flex tier is, again, it's like, can we call him like Javonte Williams plus, where it's like, he's probably the most likely to fall into the end zone, but he does it on more volume than Javonte Williams. Do you think is that fair to say, or is that a little bit too loose of a comparison?
I think it's probably fair, just from the fact that it's gross, right? Playing against Baltimore is not really what you want. We saw Jalen Warren really take the bulk of the snaps last week because they got down early. I don't expect, the Steelers to get manhandled like they did last week against Philly. I expect them to come out with a little more juice in a divisional matchup, but I do think it's, you're really hoping Najee falls into the end zone. Otherwise, you're hoping to just get about 10 fantasy points from this week.
Yeah, I mean, there is a real argument to be had that Najee Harris probably should be in the weak flex tier. You named it. Jalen Warren, 53% of snaps last week to Najee Harris's 33, only 5 attempts for 14 yards for Najee. I do think we see that increase. These AFC North battles are always in the trenches, despite what we've seen from Cincinnati and Baltimore and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh this year. I think that's more of a Cincinnati thing than it is a Ravens a Browns or a Steelers thing. I think that's more of a Cincinnati thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if this game is truly in the trenches, if this is a lower scoring game that we anticipate. So Najee, again, like if we're talking about Javonte Williams at the bottom of the weak flex tier, I think we're talking about Najee at the bottom of the flex tier as well when we get to the end of this video. So Najee, a borderline weak flex, and Jalen Warren certainly a weak flex as well, potentially saved by his pass catching upside. We'll move on to the Sunday slate now. How about the New York Giants visiting the Atlanta Falcons? This is one where I feel like I promise you, we're going to get to more nuanced conversation than telling you this guy, Bijan Robinson, is a must start. Let's not waste any breath on that, right? Now we get to a couple more weak flexes and sits. I mean, the only reason why Tyrone Tracy is a weak flex in my mind is because I think he has more upside in the passing attack. And Devin Singletary, we started to see him get more involved last week. He actually found the end zone last week over Tyrone Tracy, but still not a guy I'm interested in starting when it comes to the fantasy playoffs. I wouldn't even think twice about benching Singletary this week. And the glimmer, the sexiness of Tyrone Tracy is kind of evaporated at this point.
Yeah, you're really just holding on to the fact that he almost had 70% of snaps. And
Totally.
Although, it was 10 carries to 8 carries. That's what you're holding on to, that he's going to be on the field, that he'll be involved. But the quarterback situation is gross. The team is gross. The front office situation, like everything in New York for both teams right now, is pretty gross. So I would stay away from guys who aren't proven studs if you can. But Tracy would be the guy if I had to throw someone in a lineup that I would go with.
Yeah, good players on good teams. You're going to see a trend. They're going to be in your starting lineup. And this week, below average players on bad teams are going to be in the bottom tier. And like that's what you're going to see in every video. You're probably like, Lucas, that was the most obvious statement of the year. But especially you'll notice a trend once we get to some better teams here, some better matchups. You'll see how that truly falls out. Like this next one, this is one that I think is interesting to talk about here because we have the Detroit Lions visiting the Chicago Bears as well this week. David Montgomery is going to be out with his knee injury. Jahmyr Gibbs, locked and loaded. He is going to be probably a top 3 play across the industry this week. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's I wouldn't be surprised if people make him a top 1 play this week.
I think
do you think he's the overall running back 1 this week?
I think he might be. And unfortunately for you, Lucas, that means he's going to be sitting out of the playoffs in our Dynasty League.
I knew you were going to go here
destroyed by my team, by Devontae Adams, Josh Allen. Oh, it was glorious. It was beautiful. Beat Lucas 170
most points
to 140.
By 20 points.
It was amazing.
It was you and I. We were shooting it out. And of course, I just had to go up against a team that put up 160.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No. And that Lucas was a 2-time champ. I had won our first year. Lucas won back to back. And so I had to knock him off, hopefully regain my throne in this league, hopefully face Tyler in a week and beat him after he knocked me out last year in the playoffs. But I just had to make sure I threw that in here so the people knew, because we did talk about it a couple times last week.
No, we did. It's important that the people know that there is like heated rivalry behind all of this. We're not just 3 dudes wearing hats talking at a camera telling you what to do. Like we're just as invested in this going against one another as well. We probably should have fueled that feud a little bit better last week, but camera did come out on top. I will say I did advance to round 2 with Jahmyr Gibbs in one of my leagues, so I'm tasting victory. I'm tasting the championship already. Considering some of the other players I have that'll be on this list. DeAndre Swift, though, on the other side of the ball, actually had a relatively good day against the Minnesota Vikings.
Surprising.
Travis Homer was the one to find the end zone, though, unfortunately, which would have made Swift's day a lot better. Yet, we put him as a flex in this matchup. The Detroit Lions got picked apart by the Buffalo Bills last week. There's no shot DeAndre Swift has back-to-back good games. And I mean, no one is going to say he's going to give you a James Cook kind of game like he had against Detroit, right? But what is the ceiling for DeAndre Swift this week? He's in the flex tier for us, but is there room for him to be a fine start?
I think he could, maybe find his way up there. He has to score, right? I mean, that's what it really is going to come down to, especially for all these flex guys. Najee's the same way. I think, we could see a 16-point week if we see him find the end zone. I think he's probably more of a 10, 12-point player. The issue, or the good thing for him, is just Detroit's defense is been picked apart by injuries. I mean, they just feels like every single week is, these 2 players are now on injured reserve. So they're just breaking down. Like they just don't have the bodies anymore. So that would be the plus. But, he only had 11 carries for 39 yards in their last game. He got bailed out by 2 catches for 35 receiving yards. But, that's why he's in the flex. It shouldn't be a good matchup for him, but he did play well against what should have been a bad matchup in his last one.
Yeah, despite the terrible game against the Bills last week, I mean, the Lions are still, bottom 8 in fantasy points allowed to the position this year, so not a matchup you're looking to target. But, Swift coming off a fine game, seeing what James Cook and the Bills were able to do against this Lions defense last week, I think Swift is a fine flex this week, but he's not one that I'm like rushing to cram in as my running back 2 by any means. So let's keep it moving here, Cameron. This is another fun conversation I think we get to have as the Arizona Cardinals visit the Carolina Panthers this week. James Conner, hands down, must start. Trey Benson left this game. Who was it? Amari DeMercado, who also left this game as well. All I know is that there were multiple running backs who left the Cardinals game last week. Do you remember who the other? I don't remember who the other
I
one was.
don't
Off the top of
remember
my-
who
I
it
know
was.
Trey Benson left though for
Yep.
sure. Which Trey Benson's out. It's all James Conner then, as far as I'm concerned. Against Carolina Panthers defense that is just continuing to get absolutely kicked in by opposing running backs. James Conner's getting the workload. This is another league-winning stretch for James Conner. I wouldn't be surprised if we get another 30-plus point week from James Conner. Like, this is a guy who's probably going to be knocking on the top 5 to 7 running backs in my rankings this week. How high?
Yeah.
How are you willing to push him that high? I mean, I think I am, based on the volume
Yeah.
he gets, the receiving work he gets.
Yeah.
If he finds the end zone, I mean, I don't see why he can't against the Carolina Panthers, man. I mean, James Conner is going to take you on a league-winning stretch here.
Yeah, I would be shocked, honestly shocked, if he's below 16 fantasy points this week.
Oh yeah,
Like that that's I'm surprised if he is. I would be assuming he's got a 20-point PPR week. He's only had less than 4 receptions once, where he had 3 receptions since week 10. So he's getting involved in the receiving game. He's seen 17, 18, 16 carries. He had 2 touchdowns last week. I would be, again, shocked if he doesn't find the end zone in this one against this Carolina defense, who is just getting run all over. I think they're giving up 190 yards over the last 5 or something insane like that. They're just getting, I'm just run over completely. Man. I got to imagine they keep it up. Arizona keeps it up in this one.
Yeah. I mean, Carolina, my goodness, man, 28.4 fantasy points per game allowed to running backs, over 1,900 yards allowed to the position. That is, oh my gosh. I want to take a guess on how many more yards that is than the second place team in the league.
Oh, it's a couple hundred. I'm going to say 300.
370 more yards than second place team in the league. James Conner is, I think he probably will be knocking on top 5 of my rankings this week. It's just too good of a matchup for him with Trey Benson down. Chuba Hubbard is the other running back we need to talk about here, because again, it's all him. It's all volume his way. The matchup with the Cardinals isn't terrible. They're top 10 in fantasy points allowed to the position. He's probably the definition of a fine start for me this week, where honestly, if I'm the Cardinals, I'm okay if I want to let Bryce Young try, and beat me in this game. But Chuba, nobody's going to be surprised when he gets 19 carries in this game for 72 yards and finds the end zone, right? Like that's going to be a very Chuba day, which, will get you a running back 2 finish, I feel like.
Yeah, these last 2 games have been backwards for him. Against Philly, he has 26 carries for 92 yards and a touchdown. Then against Dallas, he only has 10 carries for 32 yards and no touch, right? So it's what Carolina team are we going to see? Is Arizona going to show up? I think there's just so many variables for Chuba. Whereas like when we talk about James Conner, it's no matter how the game script goes, pretty much he's going to be involved. He's going to be able to run the ball. For Chuba, it's what teams are going to show up on both sides, for both teams. So that's what makes him a fine start, why we wouldn't move him up to must start. But he's been getting such great volume all year that you can't put him in the flex either.
Right. I think he is like the poster child of a fine start this week. I'm not like rushing to make sure he's locked into my lineup, but like, he's probably going to be a running back 2 for me this week. And I think he belongs there respectively. So yeah, Chuba Hubbard, a fine start. James Conner, a must start against this atrocious Carolina Panthers run defense. All right. And we keep it moving on to our next matchup. The Los Angeles Rams visit the New York Jets. Again, one player that we find in the must start category, another player we find in the fine start category. Kyron Williams at this point, it's his backfield. I know Blake Corum is mixing in a little bit more, but with the volume that he gets, the rate at which he's finding the end zone. I know he didn't find the end zone against the 49ers last week. That was just I don't know what the heck we watched on Thursday Night Football last week, but it wasn't fun. But I do think Kyron Williams bounces back this week. So he is a must start. You are not questioning whether he's in your lineup or not. The question is, how much confidence do you have in Breece Hall, Cameron, your guy? You made the right decision, started him over Jonathan Taylor last week. That touchdown saved you, and Jonathan Taylor's fumble.
I got lucky
also saved you. But Breece Hall, where's your confidence level with him against the Los Angeles Rams? Because it's not a bad matchup in the slightest. But is Breece Hall 100% healthy? Are we going to see another 40% of snaps go to Isaiah Davis? Like, where's your confidence here with Breece Hall?
I think it's more than it was last week, right? Because I
It
would
has to
assume
be.
if he's playing 50% last week, as long as he practices this week, I would assume that goes up. We see closer to that 75%. It's just what Jets team are we going to get, especially against a Rams team that needs to continue to win in order to lock up the NFC West. So I'm a little worried from all the aspects going on in New York right now. But I think he's a good, fine start. I think that's where he belongs because we could see a week like last week where he gets bailed up by a touchdown. We could see the Breece Hall of old where, we get 7 receptions, we get, 150 total yards, we get 2 touchdowns, right? I think those are all within the range of outcomes for him right now. But definitely a little shakier than normal on Breece Hall this week.
Yeah, I mean that I think you nailed it. It's the shakiness around Breece
Mhm.
Hall of like, okay, we got 48% of snaps last week, which was maybe less than we were hoping for. But hey, you know
Yeah.
what? He found the end zone. He bailed himself out. It's fine. Can we get that in a relatively good matchup with the Rams here, who they get leak points to the running back position. They're about middle of the pack this year.
Yeah.
Um, and if Breece continues to get healthy, that's just another dynamic element you can add to this offense here. So, yeah, I think I think he's a fine start. He's definitely
Yeah.
not a must start, and I think even like, and like even before like the whole injury situation here, like
Yeah.
he was already slowly moving himself out of the must start category. I mean, latter half of the season here, it's been a rocky road here for Breece Hall. I mean, you can speak to that as a Breece Hall manager too.
Yeah, it's definitely been you know, you're flirting with 9, 10 PPR points per game,
Hey,
and then you get the 30, 25 point, right? So he still has in the repertoire. It's just what you were hoping at the beginning of the year of, hey, we're going to see, we saw 18, 24, 18 for him his first 3 games. And you're like, good, we got the Breece we wanted. I don't know if, that's kind of gone away. It's hopefully the game script is right for him. Hopefully, he's in the receiving game enough. But yeah, it's definitely been up and down to say the least.
yeah, to say the least. Philadelphia and the Washington Commanders. We got a divisional matchup here. This one should be fun. Saquon Barkley. Yeah, you have no question whether you're starting him this week. So let's talk about Brian Robinson Jr. because this is an interesting matchup. It's not great against the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a red hot defense right now that has been keeping teams in check. I mean, we talked about it with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren earlier, right? Just 9 rushing attempts between the two of them. 40 rushing yards, less than 40 rushing yards between the two of them as well. So they were stifled on the ground last week. Where's your confidence with Brian Robinson Jr.? We have him listed as a fine start. Is that that's got to be just because of a volume play, though, right? Because you don't have Austin Eckler. He's still on IR until week 18, and I doubt he comes back, if by the end of the season here. It makes me nervous to call Brian Robinson Jr. a fine start, but I could also see them trying to keep the ball off out of Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, Saquon Barkley, Devonta Smith's hands and say, screw that, Brian Robinson Jr., you're getting 20 carries this week. Let's burn some clock here.
Yeah, you gotta imagine they try to, especially after what Philly did to
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. I don't know if you guys saw, but just did you see how many plays Pittsburgh ran in the
Oh,
second
yeah.
half?
Oh, what?
11.
Pittsburgh only had 2 drives in the entire
Yeah,
second half.
and Philly
Um,
had a 21 play, 10-minute drive to close
yeah,
out the
close out the game. Yeah,
just gross. So
yeah,
you got to assume Washington's going to try to keep Philly away from that. In his first matchup against Philly this year, it was in Philly. He still had 16 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. So they've already shown, hey, we're going to commit to the run. It's got to be a lot easier to do it at home than it is going to Philly, which I think is one of the
yeah.
hardest places to play in the NFL. And
No
so
question.
I would imagine, that's why we have him as a fine start. But obviously, it's still Philadelphia. They can still shut you down at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is purely a volume play for Brian Robinson Jr.
Mhm.
You can talk about a Jeremy McNichols, but like, Jeremy McNichols is only going to take 4 or 5 carries in this game, probably. You're not as worried about Chris Rodriguez, obviously. We're not even going to talk about those guys. So, from a volume perspective, I'm okay playing Brian Robinson Jr., but this might just be a game of keep away, honestly. And that might be it. It's probably going to be a super ugly day for Brian Robinson, but for a running back who's going to get 20 carries, I think he's a little bit above a flex play for me this week. Because if he finds the end zone, then he just pays off the entire day. So, and honestly, like we saw him catch a few passes last week as well. Was it a few? I know he caught one or two for sure, but he can get involved in the receiving game too. Yeah, I was gonna say I thought it was a handful of receptions. Yeah, I mean he gets involved in the receiving game too enough where in PPR formats you get a little bit of a boost there. So it's not a fun play. It's a don't turn on that game if you're going to start Brian Robinson this week. But he does make the fine start tier for us. Before we jump into the rest of the slate here, Cameron, let's take a quick break here from our friends over at Underdog. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. We are halfway through the Week 16 slate. We are ranking whether every running back is a start, sit, flex, weak flex, you name it. Let's move on to the Cleveland Browns visiting the Cincinnati Bengals.
Gross.
Look, Chase Brown is a must start at this point. He is un fuego. I mean, it's absurd what he's doing in the back half of the season here. I think the Cincinnati Bengals have found their running back of the future. It's Chase Brown and nobody else. And I will gladly say I'm wrong on that. Did I get an assist from Zach Moss, or did Chase Brown get an assist from Zach Moss on the injury front? Probably, but man, with how well Chase Brown has been playing, it's hard to see that it's hard to think he wouldn't have eventually taken over this backfield. So I think he's just gotten a running start here now without Zach Moss. So Chase Brown, no question, a must start this week. Nick Chubb broke his foot. He is officially done for the year, which is just such a bummer. I mean,
It is.
right when like we want him to, we knew it wasn't going to be great working his way back from injury, but man, to now have another setback with a broken foot. I mean, you just feel for the guy. Like at this point, I don't want to call his NFL career over, but we're like basically fast. It's like J.K. Dobbins, but like 6 years older, right? It's just devastating. So I feel for Nick Chubb. Prayers out for him. But Jerome Ford does become the team's lead running back against the Cincinnati Bengals defense that is middle of the pack against running backs this year in terms of fantasy points allowed. He falls into the weak flex category for us, and I think I'm comfortable with that because there's definitely 24 running backs I'd rather play ahead of him this week, but if you're super thin at running back somehow and you're in round 2 of the fantasy playoffs and you desperately need Jerome Ford, I get it if you got to play him. I'm not really looking to start him, though. I would probably definitely play a wide receiver over him with the plethora of options you'll have there.
Yeah, it's DTR, Dorian Thomas Robinson, right? Robinson.
Yeah, Dorian Thomas Robinson. Yep.
It sounded weird coming out of my mouth, but he will be starting this week. I wouldn't imagine this Cleveland team's going to move the ball much. This feels like a let's secure our draft pick kind of move, which I mean, not to say Jameis was exactly blowing teams out or anything, right? But right. He was at least fun to watch. So
yeah,
it is disappointing from that aspect, and I do think that really does lower the floor of Jerome Ford in this one.
Yeah, I worry this might just be a squash match here where Cincinnati does just end up rolling over Cleveland. If Dorian Thompson-Robinson can keep the Browns competitive in this game, that is so much more of a strike against the Cincinnati Bengals defense than I think it is the Cleveland Browns offense. I don't think anything is solved in Cleveland because of DTR and Jerome Ford, potentially playing the game of his. If Jerome Ford plays the game of his life, I'll credit to him. But I do think if the Browns stay competitive in this game, it is much more of a testament of how atrocious this Bengals defense actually is.
Definitely.
We won't harp on this matchup any longer. It's not that much fun to talk about when it's pretty obvious where these two lie. So let's move on to the Tennessee Titans taking on the Indianapolis Colts this week. The Titans running back room is an interesting one to discuss because Tony Pollard did leave last week's game with an injury. It seems like he's going to play this week. And if he does, this is a fine start situation for Tony Pollard. Colts have given up the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position this year. Tony Pollard is getting the volume. Yeah, Tyjae Spears mixed in and actually looked, fairly good last week. He still got plenty of bursts. So I could see Tyjae Spears coming in and taking a few reps from Pollard. But for the most part, Pollard could have a 16, 17 rush attempt game fall into the end zone. And, he's going to give you fine running back 2 numbers this week. How much of a threat do you think Tyjae Spears is? Because we have him as a weak flex, but that's only because it's a good matchup. And if Tony Pollard comes into this game banged up, it wouldn't be surprising at all if they hand more work to Tyjae Spears.
Yeah, I think the only real worry is that Pollard loses receiving work. Right, he wasn't exactly getting crazy yards, but he was seeing 2, 3, 4 receptions a game, which is a nice bump, especially in PPR format. So that would be the worry. But I think against an Indianapolis team where he can, he's getting 17, 18, and 19, 20 attempts, I think he's going to be fine yardage wise, where I don't think it's going to hurt him quite as much in this one.
Yeah, teams have had no problem running the ball on Indianapolis. And I got to believe after last week's performance, you're not going to have a hard time taking the ball out of Will Levis's hands and giving it to Tony Pollard or Tyjae Spears this week. So, yeah, if Tony Pollard suits up, he is a fine start. If he doesn't suit up this week, again, we're recording this like on Tuesday. You'll hear this on Wednesday. We don't have as much info early in the week around all these injuries, but if Tyjae Spears is indeed the starter this week, is he a flex option then, or does he actually fly all the way up to a fine start?
I probably still put him at a flex option.
Sure.
Just because we just haven't seen him do it as a runner yet.
Yeah.
He could definitely end up in that fine start, but I think I'd be more comfortable keeping him in the flex option.
Yeah, I'd be much more comfortable with him in the flex option as well. I 100% agree with you there. You can make the case he's a fine start, but again, as we clip through some of these other guys here in the final matchups here, it'll be like, yeah, you know what? I don't think I would play Tyjae over that guy. I don't think I'd start him over that guy either. Yeah, it'll make sense as we continue to go on because we still have 6 matchups to cover here. So let's dive into one of those. The Minnesota Vikings visit the Seattle Seahawks for what seems like the 18th straight year in a row. It seems like the Vikings cannot get a home game against Seattle. But boy, they sure can visit Seattle during pivotal moments of the season. Coming from a Minnesota Vikings fan, Aaron Jones falls into the fine start category here. Seattle top 12 in fantasy points allowed to the position. I will say they have been better against running backs in the latter half of the season, but this is one where when the Minnesota Vikings are clicking on all cylinders, it's impossible to bench Aaron Jones. And he gets just enough receiving work as well, where it's going to give him, a few extra bonus points on top of that. So people might look at the matchup and say, you know what? Yeah, dude, smash start this week against Seattle. I just think Seattle's been playing better in the second half of the season, but that certainly doesn't keep Aaron Jones, out of your lineup. He is like a very, very strong running back to play this week. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would for sure. He's looked good for a couple weeks now. That Arizona game obviously was gross. The fumbling issue, done with that.
Right.
You get a good, decent enough matchup against Seattle. Yeah, I'm trusting him for sure.
It also just like blows my mind. I mean, if you watched Monday Night Football between the Bears and Vikings, I mean, it was like a halfback draw fest in the first quarter. For both teams, right? It's like we're throwing Aaron Jones between the tackles. We're throwing DeAndre Swift between the tackles. And it's like, okay, wait, Aaron Jones just ripped off an 8-yard run on the outside. What if we called like 3 more of those and he picks up like 27 yards in 3 straight rushes? And you're like, why has this not been like, what have we been doing this whole time? And then Chicago comes back the next possession and DeAndre Swift picks up 24 yards, right, on 3 carries in a row. It's just like, it's crazy when I understand it's not as simple as just like draw or design outside runs every play. Cause I'm right. It's not going to work. You got to mix it up. But like, it's just crazy when the light bulb goes off. It's like, oh yeah, we don't have to draw. You don't have to drop, halfback powers, for 4 straight plays in a row. We can go ahead and run the outside. Anyways, I digress. When Aaron Jones gets the ball on the outside, he's a difficult man to bring down. So is Kenneth Walker, though. Kenneth Walker is an immensely difficult man to bring down. Now, it is not clear whether he's going to play this week. Again, recording this early in the week, we really don't have many injury updates around these guys. It seems like the reports coming out, though, is that Ken Walker has put in a good workout so far this week. He might play. So if he does, I think it's not a great matchup against the Vikings, but when DeAndre Swift, went from how many rushing yards did he have in his first game against the Vikings? 29 in his first
Yeah.
game against the Vikings to 70 or 70 plus in his second game. I think Kenneth Walker's a fine start. He's not an exciting one though for me coming off of injury against this Vikings defense. But this is someone who, when Ken Walker comes back from injury, and I think Zach Charbonnet is gonna, earn his keep in this offense. It's all Ken Walker, and he goes off for 25 plus points. So that's why he sits in a fine start for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just going to really come down to the receiving work. What does that look like for him in this one? Is he getting 4 or 5 targets? Is he, moving the ball that way? Just because, over his last couple of games before he got hurt, he was 3.8, 2.3, 4.9, 1.3, 3.3, 3.9, 2.6, 3.1. Those are all yards per carry, right? In that list, there's only 1 over 4. So he wasn't super efficient. Now going to be playing against a very good Vikings defense. That would be the worry, is if he's not in the receiving game, right? If he's splitting with Zach Charbonnet coming back, that it could drop him down, towards the flex more. But volume, if he's playing, you would assume probably keeps in that fine start area.
Zach Charbonnet, if he plays, just a flex option for you.
Yeah, I think he could find himself in the fine start.
If he's the starter this week.
Yes,
sorry, I said that, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't matter. If Zach Charbonnet is the starter, flex play.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's been playing pretty well, but like we said, it's a very tough matchup. I don't see him truly popping off, going nuts against this Viking defense.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. Again, all Zach Charbonnet has to do is catch a few passes, fall into the end zone, and again, he gives you a serviceable day. But that could just be like last week as well, right? Where it's like, all right, once Zach Charbonnet falls into the end zone, that's all I need. He'll give me my double-digit points, and he becomes a viable flex option for me then. So, I would agree. If Ken Walker plays, he's a fine start. If Zach Charbonnet is the starter, he's a flex. If Ken Walker plays, does Charbonnet become a weak flex then? Do you just downgrade him 1 tier? He's not a sit.
Yep. No, I'd probably put him at weak flex. Yeah.
I'd
probably actually play him more over most of those guys in the weak flex, even if Ken Walker's playing.
Yeah. Kareem Hunt, Jaylen Warren. I think I would play him over those two for sure.
Yeah.
The rest of the tier, I think, is a conversation, but we don't need to flush all that out. This is if they both start, where they fall respectively into our tiers here. The New England Patriots visit the Buffalo Bills this week. We get another divisional matchup. James Cook is red hot after his game against the Detroit Lions last week in a great matchup with the New England Patriots, who give up the 7th most fantasy points to the position this year. He is a must start, no questions asked, locked in borderline running back 1 this week. Ramondre Stevenson is the one we need to have a conversation about, though, because the Patriots open up as 14-point underdogs in this game. Now people might say, oh yeah, Ramondre Stevenson, if the Patriots are playing from behind in this game, he might get the receiving work, but that hasn't actually been the case. You were telling me this before the podcast started.
Yeah, he's, over his last couple of games, he's seen 1, 3, 0, 4, 1 receptions. And so he's just not seeing the receiving work that we've seen, from years past for Ramondre Stevenson. And, he's been getting great carries, 20, 28, 18, 13. But this offensive line is just not good. And so the efficiency is bad. And they're just not finding the end zone. That would be the worry against Buffalo is, he's 12, 9 fantasy points in, 3 of his last 4 games. But if he doesn't find the end zone, then it just really slows him down, really hurts him a lot. And so I think that's kind of what it comes down to. And I don't think he is going to find the end zone this week against Buffalo. That's why he is in the flex.
Yeah, it's so tough because Buffalo's given up the 2nd most points of the position this year. So it's one of those where like you want to push Ramondre into that fine start category. Mm-hmm. I think he's probably at the upper end of this flex tier for sure. Like I would play him over Najee. I'll probably play him over Swift. I'd play him over Charbonnet if Charbonnet is the starter this week. But like, any of those guys in the fine starts, like I am starting them with relative confidence over Ramondre this week.
Definitely.
We'll move on to a disgusting game. The Jacksonville Jaguars visit the Las Vegas Raiders. I can't believe we're at the point where like Travis Etienne is a weak flex, man. I truly can't believe we're here. We just released a short form video, a TikTok video the other day. over on our YouTube Shorts channel as well, Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts, if you want to go follow that. We do the video every year called the Fantasy Time Machine, where we reflect on like the top 5 things we would have told ourselves prior to fantasy drafts this year. And a lot of people in the comments have been saying Travis Etienne in the second round, like debatably the biggest bust of the year. And they're not wrong. I mean, it has just been atrocious for Travis Etienne, and the Raiders in the second half of the season. I mean, they have been significantly better against running backs in the second half of the season. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but last I knew, they were like bottom 10 in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs in their last 5 games. So, man, like I'm having trouble talking about Travis Etienne, and you're the Travis Etienne manager out of the two of us here. Like, is this justifiable that he's like merely a weak flex at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been so gross. And over these last 3 weeks, you have no idea what's going on with their usage. You have no idea. Like, so week 13, so 3 weeks ago, Travis Etienne has 13 rush attempts to Tank Bigsby 7. Then week 14, Tank Bigsby has 4 rush attempts to Travis Etienne has 4 rush attempts to Tank Bigsby's 18. And then this last week, Etienne plays 73% of the snaps, has 14 carries to Bigsby's 11. He's been involved in the receiving game enough. That's, I think, why we give him the edge over Tank Bigsby is, when you're looking at it in a PPR format, he's, seeing 3 or 4 receptions a game or 4.43 over his last 3 weeks. But it's disgusting, right? He's not going to pop off. It's not going to be something, oh my goodness, look, it's Travis Etienne with, finally doing. No, it's not going to happen. So it really is because the issue with the Etienne over all the rest of these guys is you drafted him to be a starter. So you genuinely might not have anybody else. Well, and the other thing is too, you're probably not in the playoffs if you have Travis Etienne. Let's be honest.
No, all right, let's be honest.
Well, unless you picked him up off of waivers because somebody dropped him. So it is disgusting. But yeah, I think weak flex is probably the best spot for him.
Bottom 4 schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. The Raiders have been in their last 5 contests. So yeah, like this actually isn't that great of a matchup for Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. So yeah, you're benching Tank Bigsby. Etienne is like, you're praying for some pass catching upside here. But yeah, that utilization is just stupidly all over the place. And now, despite the Jaguars, being terrible against the run, I mean, we're talking about a team that has also been getting shredded by running backs this year. Sincere McCormick is just not playable. Nobody in this Raiders pass running attack is playable. I've been preaching it all season. They keep trying to run the ball. My gosh, their offensive line stinks. They can't run the ball. This is what I was harping on in the NFL draft. I'll own up, and I'll originally say like I didn't like the Brock Bowers pick. I actually thought it was a luxury pick that they couldn't afford to make, thus making it one of my least favorite picks in the first round. Brock Bowers has been phenomenal. I'll tell you what Brock Bowers doesn't do: fix your offensive line, because these dudes cannot run the ball in any capacity yet. That's all they keep just trying to run the stupid ball, and it irritates me so much. So Sincere McCormick, Alexander Madison, none of those guys, you can actually play them this week. Despite Jacksonville, where are they at on the season against top 3 in fantasy points allowed to running backs, right? Like you can't start any of these Raiders even in this matchup.
No, you can't.
Let's talk about a more fun matchup. We gave Travis Etienne too much breath. The San Francisco 49ers visit the Miami Dolphins. Devon Achane, a must start, no questions asked. He is literally, I was thinking about this while I was in the car today. It might not make sense originally, but he's basically a tight end that also gets like 14 rush attempts per game. He only averages like 3.8 yards per carry on them, but he's a high volume tight end that gets like 7 targets a game. He'll give you 40 something yards through the air. It's all low ADOT targets, right? But all he has to do is break one off, and it's a monster day for Devon Achane. So no question, he is a must start in this matchup. Isaac Guerrero. If Chuba Hubbard isn't the poster child for a fine start, I think it's Isaac Guerrero this week, where I don't think Guerrero's going to knock your socks off in this matchup with the Miami Dolphins, but I do think he's going to find himself as a very solid running back too this week. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think he's going to get enough usage that you're going to be happy with, starting him. He saw 16 carries last week in a game where we're like, is he going to play or not? It just depends on which San Francisco team we get. Because if we get the one that's firing on all cylinders, he could be, a top 5 back.
He could be a top 10 back this week, no question. Right.
100%. But if we get the one that we saw last week, it's going to be gross, and you're going to wish you're going to think, oh, he should have been in the flex consideration. So he has got just such a wide range of outcomes for a guy who is in the fine start category.
Yeah, for a Miami Dolphins defense that was very, very weak. I mean, they're still weak against the run. That's how you beat the Miami Dolphins. But for a team that was giving up a ton of points to the position at the start of the year, they're about middle of the pack in fantasy points allowed now. So it's a fine matchup for Isaac Guerrero, right? He's going to be in your lineup. I think you have to play him this week. What's beautiful is with Isaac Guerrero is that he's likely probably going to be in flex consideration for you. So your question isn't necessarily, do I play him over Najee Harris or DeAndre Swift this week? Because yes, you obviously do. Your question is, do I play Isaac Guerrero over Jacoby Myers or someone of that capacity this week?
Sure.
And my answer would probably still be Isaac Guerrero in that case, right? So fire up Isaac Guerrero. He is a fine start this week against the Miami Dolphins. We'll keep it moving. We won't waste too much time on that matchup and two fairly easy running backs to explain there. Let's have a little bit of fun and talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Dallas Cowboys this week. I want to start with the Buccaneers running backs here because Bucky Irving ripped off a 54-yard touchdown run this last week. And Rachaad White was still given 15 carries of his own. We have Bucky Irving as a fine start and Rachaad White as a flex. And I think I'm okay with that because I'm not counting on Rachaad White to get 15 carries again this week. I could easily see, however, Bucky Irving, getting 16 carries and breaking off another 30-plus yard touchdown run this week, which is, I think, the difference between the two. Bucky Irving has more likelihood, I think, of finding the end zone for you versus Rachaad White. Might give you a little bit more value in PPR, but I mean, even as we saw before the Bucky Irving injury, like Buck was still getting was still getting peppered in the receiving game as well. So, look, Bucky Irving suits up this week. He is a fine start, and he's probably at the tippy top of this tier for the fine starts, honestly.
Yeah, it's actually funny that Rachaad White in his last 8 games has 9 touchdowns.
Does he really?
6 of them are receiving touchdowns.
Why is nobody everybody wants to talk about Nick Westbrook-Akine getting 8 and 8? Where's my love for my boy Rachaad White?
Rachaad White's got 6 receiving touchdowns. And
what happens when you have Chris Godwin?
Exactly. And that's kind of they've been using him underneath a lot. But like you said, if I'm relying on one player in this, I'm going to rely on Bucky. I'm not going to rely on Rachaad White to keep the touchdowns going, especially with the way that Bucky has outplayed Rachaad White in every single game. Like there has not been a game where it's like, ooh, maybe it's Rachaad White. It's always Bucky Irving, and then they're all giving Rachaad White carries too. So I agree. I think flex and fine starts feels very good for both of them.
Which is crazy because I can't even believe I'm telling people to play Rachaad White over Travis Etienne at this point in the season when Bucky Irving is very clearly,
the best
ahead of, I should say very clearly, but like is the running back one in Tampa, and Rachaad White is, getting mixed in, but is managing to score touchdowns. And now Travis Etienne is just like left for dead. I mean, that just blows my mind at this point in the season. Rico Dowdle, matchup against Tampa Bay here, a little bit stingy actually. Tampa's been pretty tough on running backs as of late. This is a volume play for me. When Rico Dowdle has been getting the volume he has been, he's clearly ahead of Zeke is no more. You're getting a little bit of Hunter Luepke mixed in, but like nobody's scared of Hunter Luepke, right? It's pretty much all Rico Dowdle in this backfield. And I think, again, this is very similar to like a Brian Robinson Jr. I'm not necessarily like excited for the matchup, but if Rico Dowdle is going to get 18 rush attempts in this game, he's going to end up being a running back 2 on the week, making him a fine start. I mean, that's the rationale here.
Yeah, I mean, over his last 4, he's got 86, 112, 131, 149 rushing yards. So if we're following the pattern, he should be 165, 170 rushing yards this game. So I
heard it here first. Overall running back 1 on the week. Yeah. I mean, that's a logical pattern.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we got followed. The only issue is just he hasn't been really used in the receiving game, and they just haven't found the touchdown or found the end zone with him in a couple of games. So that is the only worry. Right. But like you said, volume-wise, I would trust in that. That's what makes him a fine start against Tampa Bay.
I didn't check his receiving box score. Did he finally get a bump in the passing game yet, or is he still like below 20 yards in each game with Cooper Rush? Because that's the other thing you could think on potentially, but it's been below average.
Most receiving yards is 12. He had 0 targets last game against Carolina.
Okay, that's what I thought I remembered. Yeah, I remember looking at his box score and it was like Kept seeing the carries rise. He's over the 100 mark. Still no targets in that game though. So yeah, I don't think you're going to get a PPR boost from Rico Dowdle. You're basically going to be banking on the 18 plus rush attempts he probably ends up getting in this game. Let's wrap it out, Cameron. We got Monday Night Football, and it is a doozy.
Woo.
AKA a blowout, I'm anticipating, of the Green Bay Packers walloping the New Orleans Saints visiting Lambeau Field. Josh Jacobs is a must start. Let's get that out of the way. We're not going to waste any breath on Josh Jacobs against the New Orleans Saints. He's been just destroying fantasy football recently. You're going to keep firing up Josh Jacobs. The interesting name to talk about in this game is Kendre Miller, because Alvin Kamara seems like he's probably not going to play. Again, we're early in the week. Alvin Kamara probably could tough through it. Deepak Shona, Sports Meta Analytics, what did he say? Kamara's injury typically takes 2 weeks, to recover from. He might tough it out and try and play this week, but Deepak is a guy that we really trust here around at the Fells when it comes to social media fantasy doctors. He's probably the most reliable one that we've seen out there, that is the most credible and trustworthy in our eyes. So it seems like Kamara might not play. So we're going to bank on Kendre Miller being the running back in this game against the Green Bay Packers. Again, poster child of a flex in this game for me. The matchup is fine against Green Bay. He makes it above the weak flex tier for me. But it's also Kendre Miller, and he's not good enough of a start for me to make him a fine start this week. So for me, he feels like the epitome of the flex tier in this matchup against Green Bay.
Yep, that's exactly what I'd say as well.
Kendre Miller over Travis Etienne this week, folks. There you go.
Brutal.
You heard it here first.
Brutal.
I can't believe that. You know what's going to happen? I'm going to go through my rankings this week. I'm going to be finalizing them, and I'm going to have Travis Etienne at like my running back 29 or something like that, and I'll have Kendre Miller at like my running back 32, and I'll be like, crap, I got to move Kendre up. I mean, I got to put him ahead of Travis Etienne. I can't be. Oh man, that just blows my mind. That Travis Etienne has had this level of fall off, man. Oh my gosh,
gross.
It's disgusting. Anything you want to add before we sign off here? I mean, we cruised through the whole slate here in under an hour. I'm proud of ourselves. It kind of sucks that we can't do more deep dives on some of these guys because there's so many names we have to get through. Even I don't think we wasted much breath on the must starts outside of James Conner and Jahmyr Gibbs probably. Yeah. But there's so many names here, and hopefully this gives the people like a bird's eye view of the landscape we're looking at here for week 16. Is there anything else you want to add on top of that? Anything that we might have skimmed over that deserved a little bit more attention?
No, just don't screw up your starts and sits. It matters quite a bit.
It's that simple.
Yep.
It's that simple. Don't screw them up. Play the right guys. Play the guys who score the most points. Sit the guys who don't score any points. It's pretty simple, people. It's a pretty simple formula to winning here. So again, hopefully this gives you a bird's eye view of what we have in store here for week 16 at the running back position. Again, if you're not subscribed already, make sure you do that. If you have more start sit questions, right? Like you're looking at a bunch of guys in the fine start tier and you have like a Chuba Hubbard or a Bucky Irving. You're like, all right, which one do I start this week? You can head over to our Discord as well. That's down in the description of the YouTube video or the podcast you were listening to. Head over to our Discord. We got a whole start sit channel over there. People will happily place votes on which player they would prefer this week. So if you want more advice, head over there. You can follow our other socials as well. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook and TikTok. We would very much appreciate it if you show us some love on the other platforms, especially with TikTok. Seemingly getting banned in the United States here in about a month from now. It's not looking great. So if you want to show us some love on our other platforms, especially Instagram and Facebook, we would be very, very grateful for that as well. If you want to follow our personal socials as well, I'm at Lucas Wenzel on X, CamLaw FFF for Cameron. We will be back tomorrow with the same format of video, except with the wide receiver position. So I think we'll probably have a few more wide receivers to talk about in that video. We might even go, to 45, 50 wide receivers in that video. So, depending on who all pops up. But if you want to come back tomorrow, make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications. Appreciate you all. Thanks for your support. We love getting to chat fantasy football with you all. See you all tomorrow. Deuces.